Hello, love bugs, and welcome back to your new favorite show, Dear X, One Last Thing. Because therapy is expensive, but this podcast is free. It's already December, which I can hardly believe, but for the first time in a really long time, I'm really excited for this New Year's. I'm welcoming 2026 with open arms, and I feel like I've seen a lot of people feel very similar to me, and I'm curious to know if you guys feel the same as well. Are you nervous? Are you scared? Are you upset? Are you just as excited? Let me know below. I feel like usually around this time of year, I'm really frustrated that it's the new year. I'm dreading January because it just reminds me of maybe how little I've accomplished in the year before, how little has changed in the current year. And the new year usually is just a reminder of how far behind I feel, unfortunately. But this year doesn't feel like that. This year feels like a breath of fresh air, which is similar to how our sender felt after leaving us a beautiful, detailed letter of their past, and with it just finally being able to let go. We are jumping straight into episode 6, and today's story is nothing short of moving. It is a very complex one, but that's what makes it so raw, so real, and honestly so interesting. The sender is 23, almost 24, and is sending a letter to an ex-girlfriend. The sender was 21 when he matched with his ex on Hinge, and then continued to match with her on other dating sites, and they spent around 7 months of flirting and just getting to know each other solely through the phone. The sender was 22 when him and his ex finally met up in person for their first date. The relationship was a bit on and off for a little bit under 2 years, with a total of only 2 breakups. Their first relationship was 2 months, and then the second time was around a year and a half. The sender recalls how his ex caught his eye. Right off the bat, she seemed so different from anyone I had ever matched with or even met, he says. She had a unique style and vibe, and I was almost instantly enamored with her in a way I hadn't felt about anyone in quite some time. We talked and flirted about 7 months or so, but it was very sporadic and on and off. It never went anywhere, as in them actually meeting up or being in person on a date or actually seriously dating for the longest time. Over the period of time, the 7 months that they were flirting and texting, they would fall off, they would not talk for weeks, and then they'd match on another dating app, and then they'd flirt some more, they'd slide up on each other's Snap stories every now and then, etc. Finally, in August 2023, he manages to ask her out on a date, and she agrees. They go on the first date, and he's immediately captivated. She's funny, incredibly intelligent, physically attractive, and all the other good things you can imagine. He states, while her traits and qualities were attractive to me, I think the fact that I had been chasing and pursuing her for so long artificially inflated my attraction towards her. Given that I had worked so hard to get that first date, I hadn't seriously dated anyone in 5 years, so meeting someone who I seemed to connect with and get along with was really exciting. And I was so amped to finally met someone who I could finally see so much potential with. And with no trigger warnings, we could get straight into the background of this couple. Today's episode is a longer one. It's really the perfect episode for a long car ride, or if you're getting ready to go somewhere, or even if you just want to cozy up on one of these cold winter days. Our sender writes, I was quickly enmeshed into my ex's routine in life. Met most of her close friends and gained the approval of almost all the people close and important to her. After about 2 weeks into the first date, we were officially together around the beginning of September 2023. I supported her career and her endeavors as much as I could while juggling my busy schedule of school, work, family, friends, etc. 2 months passed, and one night I was invited to go out with my ex and her friends in Atlanta. The energy and the vibe was off between me and her the whole time, and I was unsure of why. It was causing me a lot of anxiety. In a car ride back to her friend's house after we'd gone out to the bars, I was running through a bunch of potential scenarios and reasons as to why she'd be acting so strangely. And then, having a hunch as to why she was acting weird, I asked her, as discreetly as possible, if she was having doubts about the relationship, if she wanted to split. She didn't say much. She just changed the subject, and she told me we'd talk later. My heart breaks so much for this sender at this time because I am someone who's very sensitive to a vibe switch, to knowing when the energy is off. Probably comes from some things in my childhood, but there's nothing worse than not knowing if the vibe is actually changed or if you're overthinking it or if you were the reason to cause it, and then you feel not good enough and you're running through all these scary scenarios, and then you're trying to comfort yourself and tell yourself you're crazy, you're overthinking, but you still can't get rid of that like feeling that it's not, that you're not good enough, that you've done something and you don't even know what you did. And then there's this feeling that you might be losing somebody, and or like pushing someone away that you really care about, and it's like you just have this urge to fix it immediately. And I feel like our sender was so brave to even speak up and say like looking for this validation, this care, to say like, hey, like, are you having second thoughts about us? And to not get that immediate reassurance back of like, no, like, why would you think that? But almost an even more anxiety inducing answer of, we'll talk about this later. It's like when your mom texts you like, we need to talk. What? Like, are you trying to give me a heart attack right now? Yeah, I don't know. I really related with that, and realizing, that your anxiety might not be lying to you, that, your worst fears might be actually coming true. I've been in that situation so many times. And if you're an overthinker, then I know you'll resonate with that as well. But we can continue. The sender and his ex went out on a Saturday. He wakes up at his ex's friend's house on a Sunday. The ex's sister comes to pick her up, and the sender briefly meets the sister, then heads home to prepare for school on Monday. At this time, the ex reaches out to see if they could talk to our sender after school. The sender writes, I arrive at her place the next day, and the energy is still odd and abnormal, but we don't mention it. We do our normal routine when we see each other, watch TV, play video games, listen to music, talk, and eventually it's around 9 or 10 p.m. and I have to go home because I have work the next day. At this point, we still hadn't addressed the elephant in the room, and it weighed on my mind heavily, and I finally worked up the courage to bring it up and ask for clarification on why she didn't have too much to say when I asked her if she wanted to split when we had gone out on Saturday. She explains that it's difficult for her to be emotionally vulnerable and open up, but after about 10 or so minutes of talking about other things, she admits she wants to break up. Our sender does his best to try and talk things out, to work it out, but she's set on her decision. Our sender leaves crying the whole way home. Devastated, he calls out of work the next day and he gets hammered with his friends instead. This is especially, in my opinion, unfortunate because it kind of begs the question of like, what would have happened if he just never asked? If he just put in his clothes and was like, well, I have to go because I have work tomorrow. And she was just like, okay, like, would have kept going on? Like, would have kept being awkward? Would it made her push her feelings down and then like have an outburst later? Would she have got over the awkward feelings and then they would have stayed together? Would she have brought it up? It just, maybe not for him, but I know for me, I would have almost been like kicking myself of like, why didn't I just wait until she said something? Like, why did I push it? But as we'll learn in this story, everything for a reason. All of this happened in late November 2023, meaning college finals were about 2 or so weeks away. Our sender was so sad over the breakup, he could barely focus on class. He went to work looking a mess, as he said, not me. At this time, he failed one of his finals because he was so distraught that he didn't study, and he walked into the exam not prepared at all. Our sender and his ex were no longer in contact, and he couldn't find the type of concern, reassurance, consolation that he needed from the people that were around him. It just wasn't available. And he put on a front for his friends and family, but deep down he was distressed, and I would argue definitely depressed. As of current, the center notes that he's improved on his ability on communicating emotions and feelings, but at that time it just felt like it was too much to speak on, and so he continued to suffer in silence and tried to fulfill his responsibilities as best as possible. Then, about 2 or 3 weeks after the breakup happened, the sender's ex starts sending him memes and reels, which was something they did when they were dating, and it was actually a big part of their communication. It was a thing that they had. It was a big part of their jokes and their humor. Our sender, probably confused and hurt, tries to ignore the stuff that she's sending. He acts uninterested, doesn't respond, and absolutely doesn't reciprocate. But eventually he folds and he interacts, even sending some stuff back because at the end of the day, he still desperately missed her. At the beginning of the new year, January 2024, She reaches out and she asks if he would like to start playing video games with her again, specifically Minecraft. At this time, our sender would have killed for any amount of time with her, speaking, interacting, even if it was over the phone or over video games. So he says yes. For a month, they would call each other and play Minecraft, slowly regaining the comfort and the playfulness that they had in their conversations. It was very similar to when they first had dated. They talked, they made jokes, they laughed, and they really just had a good time together. Every now and then, she would say something that could be interpreted as flirting, but he convinced himself that that wasn't the case. He would rather believe that these were just offhand comments that were really simply innocent and not an indication of romance, rather than getting his hopes up and believing that she might have wanted him back. At the end of the day, it is better safe than sorry. It's now middle of February 2024. Valentine's Day is a few days away. Our sender has a date planned with someone else. During this time, our sender was close friends with a friend of his ex's. Before you get angry, no, he's not taking the ex's friend out on a date. However, he tells this mutual friend that they had that he planned this other date. He gives details and talks about how excited he was for it. Although this isn't confirmed, he has no evidence for it. He believes that the friend told the ex about it. Why would he think that, you ask? Because 2 or 3 days before Valentine's Day, he gets a text from his ex saying she urgently needs to talk. He explains he can talk to her as soon as he's off work. And as soon as they get on the phone, he notices that her tone is really nervous. After some silence on her end, she goes into this long spiel of how she misses him, and she confesses that she wants to get back together. And she says the week after they broke up, she knew it was a mistake that she broke up with him, but she just couldn't be that person. She didn't want to be that person that breaks up with someone and immediately gets back with them. After listening to her speech, our sender is understandably in shock, completely overwhelmed. He, of course, feels the happy emotions, the excitement, feeling relieved, but that doesn't change the fact that he still felt the betrayal, that she abruptly ended things and didn't consider the potential consequences to both of them. So all he could say was, "This is a lot. I need some time to think." And he ended the call. Period. He keeps his cool on the phone, but he calls his sister-in-law in a panic. He explained what happened, and he was close to his sister-in-law, so, she had been receiving updates over the course of the dating experience and the breakup. She knew what was going on. This is someone that was very much in the loop. So he explains what happened. She consoles him, giving him the space and the time he needs to figure out what he wants to do. And within a couple days, our sender and his ex arranged to meet for coffee and discuss things. After 3 months of not seeing each other, our sender is, as he says, unwittingly enamored and enticed all over again, even though he notes he didn't want to be, but he couldn't help it. They sat down. They talked about her putting forth an effort and being more vulnerable and not pushing him away, and accepting love, accepting help, as well as being more willing to make the relationship work and putting in work to make it work. Our sender talked about how her breaking up with him, it caused him to have some serious walls up, and he couldn't afford to let himself wear his heart on his sleeve and get hurt by her again. They both agreed that they would work to allow themselves to build a more meaningful relationship. They had almost weekly coffee meetups where they talked on end about emotions and insecurities that they always found came up in their relationships. In about 3 weeks or so since the initial coffee talk, they began dating again. So chronologically speaking, this puts us about mid-March 2024. After a few months pass and things are okay, they're going to bars and restaurants together. They're hanging out at her place. They're going to parties together. They celebrate her birthday, and things are seemingly better than they were the first time around. However, when they get into summer, they begin having issues. She starts talking about her job and the potential of her job moving her somewhere else. And although they had only been dating for about 3.5 months, the sender was hurt, which, being a young, deep-feeling person, that's understandable. Moving from a close-distance relationship to a long-distance relationship isn't ideal, or the thought of having to break up because someone is moving and not because of your guys' problems, even worse. Our sender wanted to make the relationship work. More than anything, he wanted to be with her. He expressed that he never forced her into making the choice of being with him or furthering her career, but expressed how nervous and anxious the idea of her moving made him, because she had always said that long-term relationships were not something she'd pursue because of how difficult they are to maintain, which, having been in one, I could second that. They talked about the possibility of her moving for her job a couple more times, but never made that much headway. Eventually, they just stopped talking about it and essentially swept it under the rug. Under the surface, our sender was hurting, and the seeds of confusion and anxiety were sown and began to grow and metastasize. About a month later, it's the sender's sister-in-law's birthday. So I believe, actually, this isn't confirmed. I believe it's the same sister-in-law that he had originally called when they first broke up, but he invites his ex, explaining that his brother and one of his sisters were going to be there. She was nervous about meeting some of his family, but ultimately agrees to doing it. They arrived at the birthday party, and she was incredibly nervous. Apparently, it was obvious. This was to be expected, so he gave her some grace for how she acted. Meeting a family can always be nerve-wracking. I mean, for some people, it flows so naturally, but I think when you care about somebody, you want the people they care about to also like you, because you know whether the person you care about says that no one's opinion affects their own. I think we all know that it helps to be liked by the family, definitely. But the ex didn't speak much to the siblings and mostly hung out around the sender and talked to the sender or played on her phone. The sender admits, honestly, he was a little irritated, but rationalized that this was her first serious relationship, and doing all these things are, of course, going to be unfamiliar and terrifying to her. 2 months later, it's now October 2024. It's the sender's birthday month. Oh, so the sender's probably 24 now, because October just passed. Happy belated. His ex, then girlfriend, his sister-in-law, a mutual friend of the sister-in-law, and the sender all go out for his birthday. They go to a rooftop bar, they have a couple drinks, and then they go and have some dinner. The sender loved getting to be able to do things with his partner and his family. At this point, his ex had only met 2 of his siblings, and he had met some of her siblings, but there was a stark difference to how he interacted with her family and how she interacted with his. And he tried his best to ignore it, to let it go, because he wanted her to be able to be herself and connect with his family as much as he was able to do with hers, but that's not something you could force on somebody. Anytime he mentioned her meeting his parents, he was always met with reluctance. It was always no. He desperately wanted for her to meet the most important people in his family, and he wanted them to almost be able to merge their lives in some way, but it was never an option, and that hurt. It only exacerbated his anxiety and the doubt he felt in the stability and the merit of the relationship. Later in October, his best friend in the whole wide world invited him and her to a Halloween party, which he felt was a good stepping stone. He was excited to finally have his ex meet his best friend and get her warmed up to meeting some very important people in his life. At this point, she had only met the sister-in-law, the brother, and one of his other sisters, and obviously for his birthday, the sisters-in-law, the friend, but that's not really important. To set the scene for you guys, the friend that he was introducing her to, the one whose Halloween party it was, this is someone who is extremely, extremely, extremely important to our sender, someone who he loves and cares for deeply. This friend is someone who he's connected with and bonded in a way that he's never done before. The love he has for this friend is some of the greatest platonic love he's ever had for anybody. Because this isn't someone he's related to, he thought it wouldn't be as scary and terrifying like meeting his dad or his stepmom. And I think sometimes it could, I don't know if it's scarier or if it's easier meeting someone of your same age, but I guess in this case, I would have assumed it was going to be easier for her, since meeting the parents and someone of an older generation brought her a lot of anxiety. I would have been like, okay, like we're around everyone in our age range, like should flow. A side note, as I bring up the parents, for the past few months prior to Halloween, the sender's stepmom had been kind of adamant about meeting his girlfriend and getting to know her, but because of the ex's fears and reservations, it just never was going to happen. The day of the party, our sender had done a lot of driving. He was a commuter student. He lives 1 hour from the GSU downtown campus. He drove up to ATL that morning, was at school all day, left the school around 5, drove to Athens where his ex lived. The drive to Athens was about an hour and 30 minutes because of the traffic. He picks up his ex, then drove all the way back to Atlanta because that's where the friend lived. So anyone that lives in a big city with traffic knows the driving is nothing enjoyable. It's not peaceful. It's not something you use to clear your mind. So I could see how this could be especially taxing. The sender and his ex weren't staying at the friend's house for the Halloween party because they had obligations the next day. So he knows that he had to do another drive back to the ex's house in Athens. So in total, he had driven for 4 hours that day and had another hour and a half drive back when they left the party to go back to her house. Our sender had an expectation that the ex would make an effort to make friends with his friends, to mingle, to have a good time, to try and connect. I mean, I think anyone would assume that. Yet, when they walked in, he introduces everyone to his ex and her to everyone. And she was not making much of an effort to hang out with any of his friends, to talk to them, to get to know them, or do much of anything. For most of the time, she would stand in the corridor at the friend's apartment, the farthest possible place from anybody in the apartment, on her phone, or she would sit on the couch and be on her phone. Our sender was understandably annoyed and upset. He was aware that this was her first real serious relationship, and that meant she might not be as quote-unquote good or open to forming bonds and connections with friends and family, but he realized he had made so many excuses for her and her inability to, and honestly just unwillingness to connect with people that were important to him. He constantly justified her behavior by saying, well, it's her first relationship. She's new to these types of things. But after so long of pouring effort into trying to bring her into his life, he realized he was never going to have what he wanted. He was never going to see her form a relationship with anyone he cared about. Her continued resistance towards allowing their worlds to overlap led to our sender to come to the realization that the relationship solely relied on her being in control, with her deciding how the relationship would work and operate, and he had no voice or any ability to actualize and introduce his world and his people and their world into the relationship. If it wasn't her friends or her family being introduced into relationships, she had no desire to connect or speak with anyone else. A month later, they were at a house party for one of her friends. It was her friend's birthday. They show up to the party around 8 p.m. or so to help set up. They drink, they get absolutely wasted, and at the end of the night, she's throwing up in the toilet, and he's consoling and helping her. She's emotional and talking about how she didn't understand how he could be with someone like her, how he could just accept her for who she was. And after a while of reassuring her and trying to keep her calm and collected, she says that she loves him, and he says it back. The sender writes, our first time admitting our love for each other, and it's a drunken night where she's a mess and I'm trying my best to support her. I wanted that moment in our relationship to be more meaningful and not a moment of drunken words. Although it was true, we did love each other. I wanted better for myself and for her. I was happy that we hit this milestone, but I was also upset and confused that the moment happened at the time that it did because I didn't think it was the greatest or most appropriate. And I was beginning to have thoughts of it not totally being true because of the circumstances of us being intoxicated. The months pass, and our sender becomes increasingly more and more unsure. In January 2025, he starts pursuing therapy again. He had had one therapist in the past and had seen a couple psychiatrists for medicinal purposes, but hadn't made much headway with the previous therapist, nor with the psychiatrist. But he knew he needed someone to talk to, and he was willing to try therapy again. He met his therapist, and he truly clicked and bonded with her. He was surprised that he felt so comfortable and was able to be open and honest with her. He was going weekly and genuinely looked forward to going to sessions, which was a sentiment he never felt before. He discussed the issues in the relationship and asked for advice and expressed the confusion that was consuming him in relation to the relationship. After speaking with the therapist for 3.5 months, January 2025 to April 2025, talking about his relationship, explaining the lay of the land of the relationship, talking about his own fears, anxieties, insecurities that were instilled and self-induced, and everything else he could think of that might be a factor in the relationship, He came to the realization he was never going to feel comfortable, fulfilled, or truly happy in this relationship. And the potential future that he could build with this person he was dating would never amount to the fullest version of joy he knew he was capable of knowing. He writes, I tried my best to reason with the situation and thoroughly consider what I should do. I was in a relationship with a person I once thought would bring me so much satisfaction, and yet it wasn't working. What I thought would have been the most epic and extraordinary relationship, the image of our relationship that I had made up in my head was simply that, a false reality, a mirage. I imagined and created this grand fantasy, and I was only met with borrowed happiness. With school and their busy schedules, they hadn't met up for 3 weeks. They were both just so busy and unable to meet for a while. And that was the time he needed to go over and reflect his feelings and think of the next best course of action. He came to the conclusion that they should break up. He was frightened and close to absolute hysteria as the day they were supposed to meet approached, and not at all prepared to break up with her, and had no plan or strategy going into it. He drives to her place after he finishes school for the day, absolutely consumed with uneasiness and angst. He arrives at her place. He sits in the car for 15 minutes to collect himself and to fortify his mind. Once he felt relatively okay enough to talk and okay enough to go through with it, he walks to her apartment door. He lets her know he's outside. She comes out smiling and attempts to offer him a hug. He shakes his head and immediately breaks down in tears, trying his absolute best to hold himself together, but he's too upset to break the news without being emotional. She asks if he needs to be held, but he shakes his head while the tears pour down his face. After a few minutes, he manages to choke out that he wants to break up because of the distance and the busy schedule. These weren't the main reasons for the breakup at all, but in the moment, our sender's mind was so scrambled and all over the place he couldn't string together a coherent explanation, provide her with a detailed, accurate explanation of why they were breaking up. I just realized right now, like, this situation, my ex's situation, the letter 2 letters ago, he was great, but not good enough for me. It's all this very rough situation where there's not this one big moment of the partner cheating or saying something unacceptable or putting hands on somebody, God forbid. It's just like this, all these little things. It's just this feeling, this knowing that this isn't how it's supposed to feel, and this isn't what I want for myself forever. And it's almost impossible to try and explain that to the person you're breaking up with, because you've had so much time to think about it and piece it together, and it's only now being sprung on them. It's not going to settle in for them the same way that it's already settled for you. He writes, I was absolutely wholly miserable afterwards. I felt physically sick and mentally exhausted. I cried for days and days, and I even reached out a couple times asking to talk to her. I wanted her back, but she declined to have the conversation with me, and so I was alone with my thoughts. I didn't know it then, but I'm glad she turned down the chance for a conversation. I'm pretty confident I would have asked for her back and honestly just done more damage to myself. I didn't realize it then, but my choice in breaking up with her was correct, and the light at the end of the tunnel was not as far away as I thought it'd be. In a separate part of him submitting the letter, he actually uses the word comatose as what he was experiencing after the breakup. But 7 days later, exactly, 7 days passed, and he wakes up. He feels no pain, no hurt, no dread. He feels amazing. It's like he had transformed overnight. He was eager to take on the day and live his life, ecstatic and grateful that the hurt was totally gone. He was seriously confused on how this could happen, though. How does someone go to sleep in an immense amount of emotional pain, emotional wounds, and abundance, feeling overstimulated and overwhelmed, and then wake up the next day feeling 100% healed, feeling out of this world spectacular? But he chooses to ride that wave, not thinking too hard about it. He begins dating and pursuing whoever he wanted. He regains his sense of confidence and appreciation for himself, for his brain, for his body, for his charm, for his abilities. It's May 2025, and at this point, he felt on top of the world. Everything he wanted found its way to him, and he knew he was deserving of every desire he had. He was free, and he was overjoyed because of it. A month passes, making it June 2025, and his ex reaches out. She texts saying, "Hey, you don't have to answer, but would you like to call sometime? Never hearing from each other doesn't feel right to me." He had a feeling she would eventually reach out, and he expected to be filled with an ocean of emotions. But to his surprise, he was only filled with a little bit of anxiety. He anticipated feeling so strongly about her potentially reaching out, and when it eventually happened, it didn't really feel quite as awful as he expected. He decides to leave the message unread for a couple days so he could get to his therapist's perspective on what he should do. After speaking to his therapist, he realizes that he's in control and has full autonomy of all of his decisions in life. He can do whatever he wishes, within reason, of course, and it would be a valid choice. If he thoroughly weighs the options and considers the consequences of the options, then whatever he chooses can be considered reasonable and rational. His read receipts at that time were still on in the message thread, so he opens the message, then exits, letting the read receipt communicate his feelings. He states, "I felt invigorated and centered. I felt like my choices I was making were correct and backed up by my growing confidence and faith I had in the original decision to break up with her. I had cultivated and continue to cultivate the deepest and strongest feeling of conviction I had ever felt in my whole life. It felt unshakable. I felt unshakable, and it was the strongest feeling of self-assuredness I had ever known." 2 months pass. It's now August 2025. At the beginning of the month, he posts an Instagram note of Chappell Roan's new song, The Subway. Given the theme of the song, the ex assumed it was referencing her. It wasn't. He was referencing himself, meaning he was the one that got away, not her. She liked the note. Honestly, for him, it was irritating. He was unsure as to why she still believed that he wanted her to reach out, being that he hadn't made any attempts to reach out and he had ignored her attempts to reach out and felt like his silence spoke for him, but apparently not. I look at it as her reaching out until she got what she wanted. And I'm not saying this makes her a bad person at all, but there's already themes of control in how she guides a relationship, right? And this is a new side of him that he's showing her, one that's not so easily swayed by what she wants and the direction that she thinks things should go. And she probably didn't really know how to deal with feeling out of control, especially with him, who caved pretty easily to her wants and her needs in the past. And I don't think that she thought, oh, he still wants my attention and wants me to reach out and still wants me in communication with me. I think she just thought eventually he's going to break. Eventually he's going to respond. He's going to text me back. He's going to text me first. Eventually there's going to be some type of communication that takes place. But to continue, he says, "Looking back on what I did, I now believe that it was a bit petty. I could have just let it go. But at the moment, I was too full of annoyance and aggravation to do so." Our sender posts a funny photo on his public Instagram story, basically explaining that he posted that song on his note because he was the one that got away, not the other way around. He captioned the story by saying, "Posting this since some people were confused because his ex was not the only person that reached out. Some other people had also reached out asking if he was getting back with his ex or considering getting back with her." His ex slides up on the story and asks, "Do you hate me? And I just don't understand why we're still mutuals on Snap and Insta if you hate me." And he responded by saying, "I don't hate you. I just thought it was funny and wanted people to stop texting me about me posting the song in the first place." His ex responds, "It felt very mean-spirited. And you never responded to me reaching out. I thought hearting the note, especially with the theme of the song, was a softer way." He replied, "I meant no harm or offense. It really was just a funny story to me." She said, "Okay." And then he said, "I'm honestly not sure if I want to talk. I'm still thinking about things." She said, "That's fair. And let me know if that changes. I'd like to talk sometime." And he said, "Yeah, I'll let you know." She went ahead and hearted that. Keep in mind, they kind of just recently broke up. So this DM or text between them is probably pretty recent. He says, "I'm 100% confident and assured in the fact that I don't want to pursue any sort of romantic relationship with her. I'm not totally certain if she's trying to reestablish a relationship between us through her attempts to communicate, but I don't want to risk talking to her and having her start a conversation about that. Because of this, I'm on the fence about sitting down with her and explaining things. I feel as if any explanation I could offer her wouldn't do as much good as she thinks it could. I'm unsure of what I should do. I do want to talk to her, but also I don't. I don't know what my next step should be, but thankfully this situation isn't taking up as much time and emotional bandwidth as it would have in the past. I still care and love her and only want what's best for her, but the feeling of shame in myself for staying is much greater. It eclipses every feeling of care and compassion, as well as any urge to have any sort of relationship with her, romantic or platonic. Our relationship was a slippery slope in the way that I didn't realize that I was unable to advocate for myself and have my input truly considered in the relationship until I had been silenced and had my thoughts and ideas delegitimized for too long. I was forced to bow out every time, and there was no other way for a discussion or conflict to end but in me being the loser. I thought I had grown past the point of bending to the whims of other people. For the most part, I have. In the academic, professional, and social sense, I have. But when it comes to romantic relationships, I still fall prey to those same patterns because I grew up with parents who demonstrated an unhealthy and toxic love and were unable to do what was best for everyone and separate until there was total destruction in their wake. More so, I was so desperate and lonely as a preteen and teenager for romantic love, yet it simply wasn't possible and widely available for me to pursue anybody. I was a queer person living in a small, largely conservative town, so there wasn't many options or people I could ask for advice. Growing up in environments like this can cause someone to do anything for someone who offers them what appears to be love and attention, even if their faults are actively causing you harm and distress. Do you feel like you just got transported into the relationship? Like, could you see everything as vividly as I could see it? No, just me? I don't believe you. That background for me felt like a movie, and I'm honored that the sender has shared so much and gave us such an honor of being a part of such a vulnerable, transformative, and honestly somewhat recent part in their life. And just, even though it is anonymous, it is truly hard to put your feelings, your emotion, your stories, your past out there like that. And I feel honored that they did that on this platform. I usually save all my thank yous for everybody until the end of the show, but I want to thank the sender right now for their honesty, for their humility, and I am truly, truly proud of you for choosing yourself and loving yourself first and doing the hard thing and recognizing the ways in which you need to grow so that you could build the life that you deserve. And with that, we can now get into my favorite part. And this is a letter I hope this ex hears. I never imagined I'd be writing a letter like this. Once upon a time, you were the only person I wanted. You drew me in effortlessly. I was completely captivated by you, but the fantasies we create in our heads rarely align with our reality. I was disappointed that our relationship fell prey to that cold, indifferent inevitability. I'd love to say I was surprised, but deep down, I always knew we would have never made it. In the end, you never would have left if I had stayed, and I wouldn't have either. But staying would have meant that you were happy, and I was trapped, unable to become the person that I'm meant to be. I'm not sure who's to blame for the lack of space I was allowed to take up in the relationship. Is it me because I was a poor advocate for myself? Was it you because you dominated every discussion, every argument, and made sure that we both knew that you were always right, even if you weren't? I'm not too sure, but it doesn't matter anymore. I'm no longer railroaded by you. I don't have to play mind games anymore. There aren't any more moves to make. The board is empty, and I've stepped away from the game. I finally realized that the only way to win was to not play. I bent at your will because I was desperate for love. Our love was complicated, intense, and earnest, but born from a place of codependency. It was a buoy for me in a sea of my own issues and problems, and I think it might have been the same for you. Before I knew it, we had crafted a relationship that was one-sided and only beneficial for one person due to an utter blindness caused by my naivete and yearning. Our relationship was unequivocally the most unique and distinctive of all the relationships I've been in. I loved the most, learned the most, and grew the most because of it. The difficult, tumultuous times I experienced throughout the relationship were lessons for me. Not one moment was pointless, and I always walked away with something, always learned more. The good times existed as well, and they mattered. but the bad outweighed the good. With you, I was stagnant. I was unable to move, unable to develop into the person I wanted to be. I would never have improved or progressed. Anxiety, sadness, and dread, the constant questioning and doubting my self-worth would have hunted me relentlessly, and I would have never gotten any sort of respite and relief from it all. That was the old me. I'm fundamentally different now, and I'm endlessly grateful for this transformation. I love my life now. I've sowed and nurtured a passion for life I've never known before, and although it took its time to get to me, it's undeniably mine, earned, claimed, fully deserved, and achieved by my own merit. I am well. I carry no bitterness or anger. I hope that whatever path you're on takes you to a place that can bring you the peace and the fulfillment you deserve. I mean, come on. If I ever need a ghostwriter, you guys know who I'm hiring. Thank you again to the Well Spoken Sender. Thank you guys, the listeners, for listening. If the story has inspired you to send in a letter of your own, and I hope it has, please check out the podcast Instagram at Dear X One Last Things. No dots, spaces, underscores, anything of that nature. Click on the link in bio. The first link is where you could send in your letter. The ones following are where else you could find this podcast. And if you enjoy this episode, if you enjoy me, if you like me, like, share, comment, subscribe, do whatever it is that you need to do to show your love, okay? I'm also wearing someone today. This is the Lover and Liars Club. This is one of the iconic tees, extra cunty. They also have another pretty iconic tee that says "Eat Me." I figured for a podcast about exes and relationships, Lover and Liars Club. I mean, how could I not buy for them, right? You could find them on Instagram. I'll link them below as well. And with that, remember, love bugs, don't text your ex. Text me instead. Until next time, love, Mia Rose.